Hello YouTube. Right now I'm going to speak with you about the Zimbabwean economy. It is one of the misconceptions that I've been speaking to you about. First one was democracy in Zimbabwe. Second was the land reform program. And as I said today, now I'm going to speak about the economy. And the number one thing I'd like to speak about is the way that Zimbabwe is always referred to in newspapers as a country that used to be the breadbasket of Africa. And when I really look at this claim, it is a very superfluous claim, because if you look at a country like Zimbabwe and you compare Zimbabwe with, let's say, South Africa in 1997, Zimbabwe's economy would fit into South Africa maybe 4, 5, or 6 times. And Zimbabwe didn't produce, maybe even a tenth of the food that South Africa produces and produced back then. But in today's media, or even back then, Zimbabwe was never referred to as a breadbasket of Africa. But for some reason, in the last few years, British media and world media has really taken on this rhetoric of, oh, this used to be the breadbasket of Africa, blah, blah, blah. And to be honest, I believe that is completely untrue. Zimbabwe was a great economy, but attributing such statements is too superfluous for an economy like Zimbabwe. And therefore, I would like to say that these statements are simply statements to create a euphemistic kind of journalism, where they try to contrast a very perfect looking image of Zimbabwe with a very bleak looking image of Zimbabwe. And the most perfect image you can get of a country is calling a country a once breadbasket. And therefore, when you report that the country is now unable to produce enough food for itself, it seems like such a big thing. But nonetheless, continuing from then on, I just want to focus on the positives with this video. I just want to correct a lot of figures that have been flouted on the internet, and I know a lot of you haven't really caught up with the news. But Zimbabwe in February finally consummated a GNU, a government of national unity between the opposition, Morgan Tsvangirai, and the former ruling party, ZANU-PF of Robert Mugabe, and Arthur Mutambara of the smaller MDC faction. But nonetheless, after the consummation of this government, I will just list a few changes that have really occurred with the Zimbabwean economy. First of all, Zimbabwe ditched its previous currency, which had become worthless. And before I carry on, a lot of people use this as some sort of a, as a springboard to kind of like diatribe the country. But in actual fact, there are a lot of countries that do not use a currency of their own. And these currencies are actually relatively rich in comparison to other African countries. For example, if you take Panama, I believe it's Panama, it's a relatively oil-rich country, and they export a lot of fuel to the United States, and they use the US dollar. There is no Panama dollar or anything, and they're an okay economy. And if you look at some economies in Europe, like for example, if you look at Switzerland, a lot of regions in those countries that are central to Europe used a lot of different currencies, and no one spoke of that ever as something negative. But nonetheless, Zimbabwe ditched its old currency. Nothing amazing about that. Now we are using the US dollar, the rand, and the pula, different currencies. But we use the rand as our main currency of exchange, really. And the reason for this is because SADC, the Southern African Development Community, is moving towards a single currency by, I believe, year 2014 or something. And therefore, Zimbabwe kind of like figured that, okay, if we're going to ditch the Zimbabwean dollar, let us actually begin to fuse into the rand monetary policy, so that by 2014 or whatever, we're able to fit in. And already countries like Botswana, Namibia already use the rand as a monetary, as their currency or their currency of reference. So when we took on this multi-currency system, Zimbabwe now has -3% inflation. In February, it was -1.6 or something, I don't know. In March, it was -3.1. Well, no, in January, it was -1.6. In February, it was -3.1. And in March, it was -3.0. So inflation is actually negative, meaning that prices are falling. And this is a stark contrast to only, let's say, 4 months ago, when Zimbabwe had something like 10 quadrillion% inflation. After that, we will realize that Zimbabwe's stock exchange, which is the second largest bourse in sub-Saharan Africa, gained 66% points after it was reopened in, I believe, February. And now the Zimbabwean stock exchange, last time I read, was worth, I believe, $3.6 billion US, and that is a surge of 66%, as I mentioned earlier. And scientists, economists are predicting that by 2011, the bourse will have surged 111%. And moving on from that, economic growth is set to will be 2% by the end of the year, and this is an environment where most economies in the world are stagnating and weakening, whereas the Zimbabwean economy is actually emerging. And this is an emergence after 10 years of constant economic contraction. And going on from there, we talk about investment, and we say investment in Zimbabwe has literally boomed in the last 3 months after the formation of the government. Companies like Moana Africa, it's a London Stock Exchange listed company, which is one of the largest gold mining companies on earth. And this company is already like tripping on its shoelaces just to get into Zimbabwe. And you have diamond companies that are planning on moving into Zimbabwe. A week ago, the president entertained 22 South African business leaders, the leaders of the biggest businesses in South Africa, and they came and they said, we believe Zimbabwe is worthy to invest in. And literally, the country has just boomed in the last few weeks. Food is just plenty in shelves, and my dad was actually in Zimbabwe, I believe 3 weeks ago, and he was saying that after something like 10 years of literally a bin collector, wasn't visiting the neighborhoods of Harare to actually collect the bins, but when my dad was there, like, bin collectors can be seen in the streets, street lights are being maintained, roads are being maintained, something that is really small for people in Britain. But if you consider a country that has 10 quadrillion% inflation, it is, really difficult to even change a light bulb in the street. But when my dad was there, he said things have changed. Schools have reopened after a lengthy closure. Hospitals are now functional. Cholera is now abating at exponential levels, according to the World Health Organization. They're actually closing down treatment centers at this point. And Zimbabwe is really emerging as an economy. I was reading the other day that even in Botswana, in some towns in Botswana, they're actually losing business. And these towns are actually complaining that the Zimbabwean people who used to buy food in Botswana aren't even coming to Botswana, because all the food they need, they get it in Zimbabwe. But nonetheless, this was a really quick video to just remove misconceptions about the Zimbabwean economy. A lot of you still believe that Zimbabwean economy is contracting and still has 1 billion% inflation. Some of you are amazed that Zimbabwe ditched its own currency. Some of you are amazed about all these different things. But I just came to say these things. First of all, having a different currency, a non-national currency, is nothing amazing at all compared to other countries if you look at it in context. And again, Zimbabwe is actually improving. So do check out my other videos. My last video is going to be about sanctions. What is the truth behind sanctions in Zimbabwe? Thank you.